What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. I think a lot of people may be surprised to see Sera anywhere near the top of this list, but to me, she's just been the most consistent of the decks in this style of deck. And what I mean by that is there are like 4 or 5 different iterations of decks that are really just trying to maximize the interaction and minimize the effort they put into acquiring points. Those of you that watched last week's tier list will know the kind of decks that I'm talking about. These are decks that are mostly devoted to impactful tech cards. Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Shadow King, Killmonger, each of these can be game-winning on its own. What Invisible Woman is doing here is twofold. The first is, if you put a Hit Monkey under Invisible Woman, it will give you credit for the cards you play on turn 6. That can be a nice thing to do, although I have found it may represent a bit of an overcommitment, so I don't do it very often. Notably, the reverse is not true. Hit Monkey will not give you credit for cards under Invisible Woman if it is played off of Invisible Woman or on Invisible Woman if those cards were not played on turn 6. It does keep track of that, so keep that one straight. The other thing that Invisible Woman is doing is letting you play games with priority. This is a deck that is, I think, genuinely hard to play, in large part because of just how much of it comes down to priority. Throwing priority so your tech cards have targets, predicting what your opponent's final turn is going to be, using Invisible Woman to delay things in the situations where that doesn't happen, against decks like Move Bounce, Normal Bounce, anything playing a bunch of ones on the final turn of the game. All of that stuff is really important with this deck. So, on the whole, I think it is the best of these decks, but I don't necessarily think that it will be the best for everybody. For me, I've gone like 75 and 40 with it over the past few days. It has been my consistently best deck, me personally, but I think a lot of these other decks might be a little bit easier to play. Shamo's build of the points and interaction archetype is still perfectly functional. I think a lot of people assumed that Galacta getting nerfed in the way that she did would mean that she ended up unplayable, but when you look at the everything else that this deck is doing, which is the Zabu, the Surge, it needs a 4 that goes with what it wants to do. And that ultimately ends up still being Galacta, even after her nerf, which is, I think, a fairly coherent argument that her nerf was definitely the right thing to do, and if anything, overdue if multiple elite decks are still playing her, even in her nerfed state. This is a deck that is, just like the previous, looking to maximize the output provided by its tech cards, or really minimize the output that its opponent is capable of getting to. That is a very powerful strategy right now, in large part because 2 of the most recent cards, DorMidMu and Nightmare, have pushed people toward these base output decks that these decks get to prey on. Just a couple of quick hits. These are basically the exact same thing. If I had to pick any of these, I would pick Sera, then I would pick the Shamo one, but the Yakub one is still perfectly acceptable. It's doing the exact same thing, so I'm not going to repeat myself heavily. You should understand what this deck is trying to do. It's just using a werewolf package. Exact same deal here. Instead of investing in Werewolf, we are investing in Gwenpool into Mysterio into Sasquatch. That is where our points come from. The goal is to play a Sasquatch on one of the 4-cost tech cards on the final turn of the game. It's exactly the same as every other iteration of the points and tech deck that you've seen in terms of how organized it is, how it is organized against the metagame. And I think there are plenty of other decks that could very well fit in this category, like the Thor's deck is basically doing this as well. Any deck that is sort of looking like this or looking to do a minimal investment in points with a maximal investment in tech, these are the 4 that I think are the best, and that was roughly the order in which I would rank them. Now that that's out of the way, it is time to talk about how the metagame got better. With the nerf to Galacta, those decks are no longer far and away number 1 with a bullet, the absolute best things to be doing. Last week, I was very sure one of those 4 decks was the best thing to be doing. This week, I am not nearly so sure. There is a lot more ambiguity, as there should be after an OTA only a few days ago. What you're going to be looking at here are other versions of decks that are using different point packages with less investment in the full tech. So, for example, you have this version here, which is meaningfully teched out as a V-hand deck. Keep in mind that, again, the points are coming from the V-hand hood misery stuff, but it's still a deck that is looking to play reactive when it has to, which is not necessarily an uncommon situation. Now, since the backbone is that V-hand hood misery stuff, there are different point spikes than in, say, a Sera deck, and different things that are very good and very bad for you when they happen in the game. But generally speaking, you don't have nearly as many answers, you just have a greater ability to ask questions. And that is what this deck is trying to do. One of the cute interactions here that I really like is that it justifies the use of Shadow King by playing an anti-venom. I'm a big fan of that. The other thing I really like is Juggernaut, which is quite good against a lot of these decks. Only the Sera decks on the best of draws will be filling up the entire every location. Juggernaut will very often be good against people that are trying to plan out tech against you, especially. And since this deck can be vulnerable to tech, things like Enchantress on, say, I don't know, your V-hand, you kind of need that Juggernaut to actually sit there and protect you a lot of the time. It's a powerful way to approach this metagame. Another mid-range core that definitely bears investigation and is doing very well right now, in my humble opinion, is Annihilus. Now, there are a couple of different Annihilus decks, and here's where you see people really departing from the full points and tech kind of thing, because Annihilus is looking to get all of its disruption from basically everywhere else. It's a heavily board-focused deck. This is not a deck that's going to come from behind and blow you out with a tech card. This is a deck where on the board, you're going to be able to see, oh my god, I can't play here. Oh my god, there's -9 here. Now, this deck is taking some notable splash damage from just how popular Merlin is as a card across decks right now. It makes the Annihilus plan a lot worse when your opponent is able to actually turn the fact that you sent a -9 power void over to them into a genuine upside, which means that a lot of the time in this deck, what you're going to be doing is evolving that void via a polymorph or via an Agamotto spell of some kind, which does sort of raise the question of like whether or not this should be an Annihilus deck at all. Although when they don't have Merlin, it is absolutely devastating to -9 people. I think this deck has a lot of upside, a very powerful thing to be doing right now, but the lack of tech means that sometimes you just end up not being able to interact with things that can go way over the top of you. 12 Card Anni looks a lot like one of those tech decks, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on what kind of person you are. But I do like the adaptation of actually getting a Cersei in here, because again, like we've talked about how hard it is to actually want to send the void over in Merlin matchups, having an extra thing to just turn that void into guaranteed upside is actually just really good. I have enjoyed the Cersei. It has been good against me. I think this is a solid way to approach 12 card Annihilus right now. It might be a little bit too heavy. Like, I think a lot of what makes this deck good is when it's able to get off like an early Zabu Surge. But as a Zabu Surge deck, this deck can roll downhill tremendously. Let's take a break from heavily optimized versions of mid-range decks and talk about a generally unoptimized but potentially powerful archetype, and that is DorMidMu. I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is a tier 1 deck or really anything close to it. I think it's very awkward, but I also feel like this is a metagame that is really, really anti-DorMidMu in the sense that like there are so many people playing these like heavy tech decks, and a lot of these heavy tech decks are phenomenally good into DorMidMu decks. And I still don't feel like this deck is actually bad. So really what I'm saying here is like, A, people are going to be playing a lot of DorMidMu stuff still. It's good enough that people are still playing it. It is a major part of this metagame. You should pay attention to it. But also B, like, I do kind of wonder if there's a future for this deck as a sort of, we don't have any tech, but we're bigger than the mid-range decks kind of thing. And I don't think that's like a permanent spot it can occupy, because once you occupy that spot for too long, people just start playing like, you know, Mr. Negative, and then you feel really stupid for like trying to occupy that spot. But I've actually been fairly impressed with like the size of the Wolverines in here, the Bucky Barnes stuff. There's good rate in here. And I think this is a really interesting shell that is doing pretty decent work despite a fairly hostile metagame. Now, granted, there's a lot of easy ways to beat this. Like, I don't want to sit here and act like this is like a great thing to be doing, but it's definitely better than I thought. And frankly, I ended up getting the DorMidMu Spotlight variant, so I'm at least optimistic enough to do that. I think the way I would approach playing Nightmare is largely this direction, which is kind of unfortunate because as much as we talk about DorMidMu being a bit of a tech victim and those decks mostly existing because of DorMidMu and Nightmare, I think it is a lot harder to be a Nightmare gamer than it is to be a DorMidMu gamer in a world where all of these decks basically guarantee to have a Shang-Chi. Like, even the decks that are taking their other tech cards out, like you'll see people cutting Killmonger, you'll see people cutting Shadow King, you'll see people cutting Enchantress, nobody cuts Shang-Chi. It just doesn't happen. And while the other deck, that being the DorMidMu deck, has multiple ways of playing small ball with like Bucky Barneses and demons and things like that, you kind of don't. You are invested in being a tens deck. And if you're going to be a tens deck, you're going to get shanked and it's going to be sad. And that's just kind of how it is a lot of the time. That's life when you're playing Nightmare. Again, one of the things I've noticed is people are still snapping Nightmares. And I want to be super clear. The card I do not think is good enough to snap. It's a good card. I'm not going to sit here and act like it's not a good card. But Nightmare on its own, without seeing what you get out of it, I don't think it's a snap condition. That card is not Mr. Negative. This card, on the other hand, is Mr. Negative, and it's still a very good choice. Mr. Negative is a powerful deck with one very prominent counter, Mobius M. Mobius, that really manages to be kept in check by the existence of Mobius. It can be a very difficult ask to play a deck like this. Interestingly, the Sera deck does have outs into Mr. Negative, stuff like Enchantress and Shang-Chi under Invisible Woman, like priority shenanigans of that nature, mean that the Sera deck can actually like go for a game against this, but I wouldn't call it favored. And most other decks in the game are just going to fold to what Mr. Negative has to offer if you are doing something like Negative into Jane Foster or anything involving, like, really just pretty much anything involving the card Mr. Negative most of the time. Your range is effectively infinite. Decks are not going to be able to match you, and you're going to be bullying people out of there. What you really need to keep an eye on are, first, the people that snap back, they know what you are. They have a reason they're snapping back. You have to be really cautious about that. Second, in games where you like really are thinking like, okay, what would make them stay? You have to really think hard about that. Like, you need to run through every card in the game. Be like, what if it's this? What if it's this? What if it's this? What combination of cards would make them stay? Because the most important thing for me with Mr. Negative is you need to convert your good draws into wins. Getting scammed out of one 4-cuber can be devastating for this deck because it needs all the wins it can get. It is not a deck that has a bunch of wins built in. It has a decent amount, but probably not more than 50% of the games are you going to get free wins, which means you need to convert for good cube rates when you have the chance. Move Bounce is kind of nice deck right now. I don't think there's anything anyone can say that would convince me that Move Bounce is anything short of an elite deck. It's just very, very good. It has been very, very good for the entire time it has existed. It is a difficult deck to play. It is a powerful deck to play. One of the advantages of the Sera deck is that because of the Invisible Woman, you can actually just like ruthlessly obliterate Move Bounce. Things like Killmonger and Shadow King and Shang-Chi under an Invisible Woman actually do genuinely farm this deck, but there are still just a lot of just really good matchups into this because it is a deck that is so good at throwing priority, and unlike Mr. Negative, there's not like a single card that just says, actually, you lose the game. And I think that that is largely the strength of this deck. It is a deck that can output more points than any reasonable mid-range deck can match without tech, and it is a deck that can dodge all of the reasonable tech that a mid-range deck can play. You have to be going full Psycho Sera mode to get an Invisible Woman Killmonger into your deck. It's just, you do have to be kind of a crazy person for that. Discard's in a really interesting spot. I've actually seen a little bit more of the Dracula Apocalypse Khonshu version of Discard than I have this version of Discard. I am still convinced that this version of Discard is relatively superior, but, you know, the argument against me is basically, hey man, this version dies to like 5 different tech cards, not all at once, but if a deck has all 5 of those tech cards, it's probably hard to deal with when you're a discard gamer. And there are a lot of decks playing like 5 different tech cards, right? Like you have Morbius getting Enchantress, you have Meek getting Killmongered, you have Dakin getting Shadow King, you have anything getting Shang-Chi'd, you have Collector getting Shadow King. There's just kind of a lot, right? Like, it's just kind of a lot, and that weirdly sort of positions the Dracula version a little bit better, because one card a lot of these decks are not running is Red Guardian, and so you're going to be able to sort of set yourself up such that, like, the Dracula, weirdly, in this specific metagame at the top end of Infinite is actually a little bit safer than any of this stuff is, which is weird, right? Like, it's just, that's not normally how it goes, but I do think that's the argument for the Dracula version of it right now. I think that's a very temporary argument, but it is the argument. I don't really know the right way to say this, but I kind of think this deck is just perennially underrated. Like, it just feels like such a safe play into so many things. People are investing really heavily in, like, this Sera tech crap, and you get to Eliath them. You get to like Negasonic their potential Seras and Gwenpools on 3 and 4. You blow up like a Bishop, a Sera, a Gwenpool. Any of that stuff is just obviously broken for you. You have a ton of energy. You don't really have a lot of good targets for tech. It just sort of feels like it might be time for this deck to come out of hibernation. It just does so many things so well right now. And I think that there is just a really good argument that this has become a deck that people just straight up forgot about, and they shouldn't. It is genuinely very good. The nerf to Galacta has brought about a bit of a change in my recommended build of the Batroc midrange deck. We are now going more towards a different style of Batroc midrange as opposed to the 4's Surge heavy style that I was playing previously when Galacta was strong. This deck was cooked up by Ika, and he and several of my friends at High Infinite have been telling me for a couple weeks now that this is their preferred version. I personally disagreed until Galacta got nerfed, and now I think it kind of just edges it out. This is another deck in much a similar way to the Wiccan deck, where it's like, we're going to have a bunch of stuff. It's going to be very hard for you to play against us as a tech deck. Hellion allows us to do crazy stuff or not do crazy stuff. Good luck guessing where our stuff is. Also, all of our stuff is really good on rate. One thing this deck does not want to see, though, is a Shadow King. Like, boy, does it not want to see a Shadow King. A lot of green power in this deck, and it also applies red power to your opponents thanks to Scream. Shadow King, quite good against this archetype. I don't really know why. I love this deck a lot, but all the times that I play it recently, I feel like I just don't get anywhere, and maybe it's just like everyone knows the deal at this point. Maybe the nerf to Hazmat was more significant than I thought it was, but like, we've had the nerf to Hazmat, we've had the nerf to Luke Cage. This deck is still okay, it's still solid, but I feel like it actually kind of suffers for lack of being able to, like, play things like Merlin. Like, there are a lot of other decks that are, like, being good at things because Merlin allows them to be good at things. This is a deck that doesn't have the ability to do that. If it doesn't get its Zabus or its Surges out there, it's not getting much of its power down. These 4s are really good, but you really want to be getting them down when you have 3 energy and not 4. And so it sort of feels like in order for this deck to keep up with all the things the best decks are doing, it ends up just sort of not being able to do that unless you're getting your Zabu Surge things going into your 4s. And I don't really know why. Like, I can't diagnose this, but this deck has felt anemic for me. It really has. Weirdly, the Galacta nerf actually matters here too. Like, I'm not gonna say that this is the deck that took the most damage from the Galacta nerf, but like, it's actually a pretty significant amount of damage because this is a deck that is really looking to multiply the Galacta buff, and when you have less of it, you are able to do less of that. And you know, obviously it's also taking a little bit of splash damage from the relative popularity of Shadow King, but like, bluntly, I still think this deck kind of runs over a lot of the tech decks just because they're not equipped to deal with a Nimrod. When you look at all these decks that are playing like Shang Ench, it's just like, what are you supposed to do about this? It does have some questionable snap equity in the sense that, like, if you're snapping, they're leaving. Like, they know the deal. You play a Kid Omega, they know the deal. There are combo decks that can maybe go over the top of you. Anyone that stays, you need to be super careful of, because you have to assume they know what's going on. But like, if you're able to pull off your Nimrod stuff, it's just good. One of the things that has gotten notably worse, I think, is like there are going to be decks that might be able to reasonably throw priority against you if you are doing your Black Panther plan, the Elixir one. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff that makes the Black Panther Elixir plan a lot worse in this current metagame. It's not just the fact that everyone's running Shang-Chi and they blow up your Kid Omega. It's just like, it's also the Shadow King everywhere. So you end up with like a deck that has a lot of plans. Plan A is still great. Like if you're Nimrodding people, you're beating the hell out of all these tech decks. But plans B through D, I think basically all of them got worse when this change happened. Cerebro's actually just pretty damn good right now. Like you are able to protect a lot of your stuff from tech with a Goose that is going to protect your Cerebro from most everything. You have a lot of different things that you can reasonably be trying to do in this shell. The real flex slot here is Rogue, who I have in here just in case people start like red sculling again, but you can kind of do whatever you want with that slot. I think it's very open-ended. I think this deck is actually quite solid. Like, it's just going to be able to output points, and it can dodge a lot of the interaction that the tech decks bring to bear, thanks to Goose. And the same applies to Cerebro 3, which is doing, you know, basically the same thing. We're trying to dodge the interaction, but the ways in which you dodge the interaction involve, like, movable Cosmos off of a Madam Web. I like this adaptation. I'm trying to remember who it was who I first saw doing the Madam Web like multiple man thing in C3, because I remember it happening like 6 months ago, and the name is on the tip of my tongue, but I just can't get to it. And I remember, like, if you go back and watch enough of my videos, you'll see a list that looks a lot like this. I'll credit the person in that, but I can't remember it now. And I lost to this recently. I saw someone doing it, and I was like, oh yeah, that is awesome. I remember that. No guarantee that it's the best version of C3. I know Eggy has also been messing around with C3. I think that C3, again, like, you have this Cosmo. Cosmo protects you from all the tech decks. Just being a good Cosmo deck with a lot of point output, it's just good enough right now because the point output is pretty low because everyone is doing all this tech stuff. So if you can stop them from teching you, you're just going to win. I've seen some positive reviews of Thanos 10s right now. I think largely the argument for this is actually that it is a 10s deck that plays Armor Cosmo. Like, you want to compare this, in my opinion, to the Nightmare decks, right? Like, this is like if the Nightmare decks actually had counterplay in them. And that's a really good spot to be in. Like, this, legitimately, I want to be super clear about this. I think this deck is just better than the Nightmare decks because it gets to play Armor Cosmo and actually blank these tech cards that are otherwise blowing you the hell out. And if you can play some 10s into like Armor Cosmo Scar, that's amazing. That is an amazing, almost certain win if you can make it happen. Like, it's just that damn good. And so if you're able to do something like that, 10, 10, 10, Armor Cosmo Scar, boom, 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 you just cannot lose. Like, it's just very difficult for you to lose to any of these tech decks. And I think largely the argument for this as a Thanos deck is not necessarily all the way there. I've also enjoyed some ongoing Thanos, but the argument for this as a 10s deck with counterplay to all the tech, I think is actually a much stronger argument. One of the things I enjoy about lists like this is that there's just so much that they can do against these tech decks. The real problem, though, is that there is kind of a lot of Killmonger, and you are invested in some fairly large ones a lot of the time. One thing I've seen, I can't vouch for this, is people playing Merlin instead of Kitty Pryde or one of the other ones in order to get polymorphs to turn their other ones into 2s so they don't get frickin' Killmongered. It's not the greatest plan of all time, but Merlin, much like Kitty, will be giving you these spells to use to trigger Thena. Red Guardian, definitely at a low. Both Juggernaut and Cosmo are very relevant cards right now. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea, I might look at maybe replacing Cassandra Nova because I think both Arishem and Thanos are at a relative nadir in this metagame. But it is just like, I think that I like the Juggernaut Cosmo part of this. I like the points package. I don't love investing in ones. And investing in ones you are going to be doing some of the time, especially it's like, one of them's a 1/6. You lose that and it could really matter. This is not a deck that has like overpowering wins. This is a deck that wins by a little bit. And so Killmonger will lose you games if you can't get around it. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. And I will see you in the next one. Remember to like and subscribe. Leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the video. I still read all of them. And as always, thank you so much for watching.